It was a quiet evening at St. Joseph's Hospital in the heart of Texas. The hum of monitors and the occasional shuffle of nurses' shoes filled the air as patients rested in their beds. Among the staff there was one nurse everyone admired, Eliza Hart. With her warm smile, calming presence, and almost uncanny ability to comfort even the most restless patients, she was considered the soul of the hospital. No one would have guessed that behind those kind eyes hid a secret darker than the Texas night sky. Eliza's colleagues often marveled at her dedication. She worked long hours, took double shifts without complaint, and never shied away from the most challenging cases. She was the type of nurse patients prayed for in their weakest moments, a beacon of hope in a place often marked by pain and loss. To those around her, she was selfless and compassionate, always putting others before herself. But they didn't know about the storm brewing beneath her composed exterior. Outside the hospital walls, Eliza's life was far from perfect. Her small, neat apartment was a sanctuary filled with pictures of a man she called the love of her life, Daniel. But the truth was, Daniel was slipping away. He was charming and ambitious, a man who loved to be admired, but his eyes had started wandering. Eliza felt it in the way his texts grew shorter and his excuses longer. She couldn't bear the thought of losing him. He was her everything, her dream, her reason for pushing through the exhausting days and sleepless nights. She would do anything to keep him, even if it meant crossing lines she once thought were unthinkable. But it was during one of those lonely nights, scrolling through Daniel's social media, that the seed of her dark transformation was planted. She saw him laughing in a photo with another woman, a younger, prettier woman. The caption read, "Celebrating New Beginnings." Eliza's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, but amidst the heartbreak, something else began to stir. A quiet, insidious voice whispered, "You don't have to lose him, you just need to take control." The next morning, Eliza walked into the hospital as if nothing had changed, but deep inside she was no longer the same person. She greeted her colleagues with her usual smile, but her mind was racing. It wasn't long before her thoughts turned into plans, and her plans into actions. She knew where the vials of potassium chloride were stored, how to manipulate the dosage so it seemed like natural causes, and which patients were most vulnerable. The power she held terrified her and thrilled her. As the days passed, Eliza became a master at wearing masks. To the world she was still the perfect nurse, but in her heart, she had become something else entirely. And it all started with one simple, chilling thought. If I can't keep Daniel's love, then I'll find another way to make him stay. Eliza's transformation from the adored nurse to something far darker didn't happen overnight. At first, it was just intrusive thoughts, a quiet, persistent voice urging her to take control of her unraveling life. She tried to ignore it, but the more she felt Daniel slipping away, the louder the voice grew. One day, it wasn't just a voice anymore. It was a plan. Her first victim wasn't a target, not at first. Mrs. Hargrove, an elderly patient with advanced heart disease, had been admitted to Eliza's ward 3 weeks ago. She was frail, her prognosis grim, and she often clutched Eliza's hand, calling her an angel sent from heaven. Eliza's heart twisted every time she heard it. An angel, if only Mrs. Hargrove knew. It was a rainy Thursday night when Eliza made the decision. She had spent her lunch break staring at a photo of Daniel and his new friend, her blood boiling as she imagined the two of them together. When she returned to her shift, Mrs. Hargrove called her over, her voice weak but warm. "Thank you for all you've done for me," she whispered. "I don't know how much time I have left, but you've made it easier." Eliza smiled, her mask firmly in place, and squeezed the old woman's hand. "I'm just doing my job," she said softly. But as she walked away, an idea took root. What if she could control not just her patients' lives, but her own? What if, instead of being powerless in Daniel's betrayal, she could regain control in ways no one would expect? That night, Eliza found herself standing in the supply room, staring at a shelf of medication. Among the neatly organized rows was a vial of potassium chloride, innocuous to anyone who didn't know its potential. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, her mind racing. She told herself it wasn't about malice. It was about proving she could take control. Mrs. Hargrove was already dying, wasn't she? Eliza convinced herself it wasn't wrong. It was mercy. It was mercy. Their minds were racing together and mercy came to the rescue. Eliza convinced herself it wasn't wrong. It was mercy. When she administered the injection, Mrs. Hargrove didn't even flinch. The old woman drifted into a peaceful sleep, and by the time Eliza finished her shift, she was gone. The death was ruled natural, as Eliza had predicted. No one questioned her. Why would they? She was the perfect nurse. As Eliza walked to her car that night, a strange sense of calm washed over her. The guilt she had expected never came. Instead, there was a thrill, a sense of power she hadn't felt in years. She could change the course of someone's life, end it if she chose, and no one would ever know. For the first time since Daniel's betrayal, she felt in control. But the satisfaction was fleeting. The next morning, Daniel texted her, "Busy this weekend, don't wait up." The emptiness returned with a vengeance, and so did the voice. "One isn't enough. Keep going." It wasn't long before Eliza found her next patient. This time, she didn't hesitate. With each death, she felt her power grow, the thrill overshadowing the guilt, and as her actions escalated, so did her confidence. What had started as a desperate attempt to regain control was quickly spiraling into something much darker. And there was no turning back. If you want more gripping tales like this one, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. We've got more unbelievable stories coming your way. Eliza's second victim came just days after Mrs. Hargrove. This time it was a middle-aged man named Mr. Alvarez, recovering from surgery in her ward. Unlike Mrs. Hargrove's death could be justified in Eliza's mind as a mercy killing, Mr. Alvarez was expected to make a full recovery. But for Eliza, it wasn't about their health anymore. It was about the rush. By now, she had perfected her routine. She'd wait for the quietest part of her shift, late at night when the other nurses were busy with paperwork or distracted by their phones. She would pick a patient with no immediate family hovering nearby, someone whose passing wouldn't raise too many questions. With a syringe of potassium chloride hidden in her pocket, she'd slip into their room, administer the fatal dose, and calmly walk out as if nothing had happened. Each time, the sense of control gave her a rush she couldn't resist. Mr. Alvarez's death, like Mrs. Hargrove's, was ruled natural. The day she learned the full details came breaking her heart. The scientist declared. The staff mourned him briefly, but the hospital's high-pressure environment meant there was little time to dwell. Another bed was quickly filled, another patient admitted. Life moved on, and so did Eliza, quietly, methodically, leaving a trail of bodies in her wake. But as her crimes escalated, so did her confidence. By the time she reached her fifth victim, a young man named Joey who had been admitted after a car accident, Eliza no longer felt the need to justify her actions. Joey had a mother who visited every day, her tearful prayers filling his room. But Eliza didn't care. To her, it wasn't about the patients anymore, it was about the power. Every injection was a reminder that she controlled life and death, that she could play God without anyone suspecting. Still, cracks began to show in her carefully constructed facade. Fellow nurses started noticing that deaths seemed to cluster around her shifts. One joked that Eliza was cursed. Every time you're on call, someone dies. But the comment planted a seed of suspicion in others. Dr. Patel, a senior physician, began pulling patient records after Joey's death, and noticed an unsettling pattern. The 5 patients who had died under Eliza's care all had seemingly natural causes, but something didn't sit right with him. Meanwhile, Eliza was becoming reckless. The thrill of the killings was no longer enough. She started leaving subtle signs, almost daring someone to catch her. A medication left slightly out of place here, a dosage note that didn't quite add up there. She craved the attention, the validation that her actions weren't going unnoticed, but her recklessness didn't go unnoticed for long. One night, a junior nurse named Clara found a used vial of potassium chloride in a trash can Eliza had forgotten to empty. Clara didn't think much of it at first. Medication errors happened occasionally, but as the deaths continued, her unease grew. Clara confided in Dr. Patel, who decided it was time to escalate their concerns to hospital administration. The Secret Service entered the building at 8 o'clock, an hour earlier than usual duty. Unbeknownst to Eliza, the walls were closing in. Her once flawless reputation was now under quiet scrutiny, and a team of investigators had been assigned to review her patients' records. But Eliza remained oblivious, intoxicated by the sense of invincibility her crimes had given her. She continued her deadly spree, unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. The unraveling of Eliza's deadly secrets began quietly, like the first cracks in a dam. Dr. Patel's suspicions had sparked a deeper investigation, and the hospital administration brought in an external forensic consultant to review the recent deaths. They examined patient charts, medication logs, and security footage, searching for any anomalies. While nothing definitive emerged at first, there were patterns that couldn't be ignored. Meanwhile, Clara, the junior nurse who had found the discarded vial of potassium chloride, couldn't shake her unease. She started paying closer attention to Eliza's behavior. What she noticed unsettled her even more. Eliza had a peculiar habit of volunteering for patients who were the sickest or most vulnerable. To Clara, this once seemed like kindness. Now, it felt calculated. Clara's growing suspicions led her to document every irregularity she noticed, from missing vials to odd shifts in patient conditions. The tipping point came with the death of Mr. Carpenter, a beloved grandfather recovering from pneumonia. He had been on the mend, even joking with nurses about going home to his family, but during one of Eliza's shifts he suddenly went into cardiac arrest. Despite the code team's efforts, Mr. Carpenter didn't survive. His death hit the staff hard, until Dr. Patel noticed something odd in the post-mortem blood work. Traces of potassium chloride were found, an anomaly given that it hadn't been prescribed during his treatment. This discovery prompted the hospital to act decisively. They quietly placed Eliza under surveillance, monitoring her shifts and movements. The investigation intensified, and soon more irregularities emerged. Security footage revealed Eliza entering supply rooms at odd hours and spending unaccounted-for time in patient rooms shortly before their deaths. Autopsies were ordered for several patients she had treated, and the results were chilling. All 5 showed traces of potassium chloride in their systems, consistent with fatal overdoses. Eliza, oblivious to the mounting evidence against her, continued her routine as if nothing was amiss. Her confidence bordered on arrogance. When questioned casually by Dr. Patel about Mr. Carpenter's death, she brushed it off with a practiced smile. "It's always hard losing a patient, but we did everything we could," she said, her voice steady, her mask firmly in place. But the walls were closing in. One night, as Eliza finished her shift, she was approached by hospital security and escorted to a private meeting room. Inside, the hospital administrator, Dr. Patel, and 2 investigators waited. Eliza's heart raced, but she kept her composure. "What's this about?" she asked, feigning innocence. The administrator slid a folder across the table. "We've been reviewing patient records and have some questions about your care patterns," he said evenly. Eliza opened the folder and froze. Inside were detailed charts, lab results, and security footage stills. Her face stared back at her from the images, caught on camera entering a patient's room minutes before their death. For a moment, Eliza's mask cracked. Her mind raced for an explanation, a way to escape. But before she could speak, one of the investigators leaned forward. "We've found lethal doses of potassium chloride in multiple patients you treated. This is a serious matter, Ms. Hart. We need you to come with us." Eliza's carefully constructed world shattered in an instant. Her colleagues, once her admirers, now looked at her with suspicion and disgust. As she was led out of the hospital in handcuffs, the whispers began. The perfect nurse, the angel of mercy, was now exposed as a cold-blooded killer. The truth had finally come to light, but the fallout was just beginning. If you want more gripping tales like this one, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. We've got more unbelievable stories coming your way. Eliza sat in the courtroom, her once composed face now a mask of exhaustion and defeat. The evidence against her was overwhelming. 5 patients dead, all poisoned by her hand, each case meticulously tied to her shifts. Her trial had captivated the nation, and the media dubbed her the Texas Angel of Death. But as damning as the forensic evidence was, it was the testimony of one person that sealed her fate: Daniel. When he took the stand, Eliza's heart sank. She hadn't seen him since her arrest, and she had clung to the hope that he might still care for her, that he might He described her obsession, her constant need for his attention, and how her jealousy had driven a wedge between them. "I never asked her to do any of this," he said, his voice cold and distant. "I didn't even know what she was capable of." The words cut deeper than the accusations of murder. Eliza had told herself that everything she did was for him, to preserve their love. But here he was, painting her as a delusional woman he had tried to escape. The courtroom was silent as he delivered his final blow. "She wasn't trying to save anyone, she just wanted control. And when she couldn't control me, she turned to controlling life and death." Eliza's lawyer tried to shift the blame, arguing that she had been mentally unstable, that her actions were the result of untreated psychological trauma. But the jury wasn't swayed. After deliberating for less than 3 hours, they returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts of murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In her cell, Eliza replayed Daniel's words over and over, the betrayal cutting deeper than any punishment the court could impose. The power she had once felt, the control she had fought so desperately to maintain, was gone. Her story ended not as a tale of twisted love, but as a cautionary example of how obsession could destroy everything, even the one person she had tried to hold on to. As the media moved on to the next scandal, Eliza faded into obscurity, just another name in the annals of Texas's darkest crimes. But the families of her victims would never forget, and neither would the nurses at St. Joseph's, who still whispered her name in hushed tones during the night shifts, haunted by the memory of the angel who had turned into a monster. If you want more gripping tales like this one, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. We've got more unbelievable stories coming your way.